Good afternoon in South Africa and good evening in India.
Am I able to see
you,
your face, sir? Where? Oh, yes. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Vanakkam, vanakkam.
Vanakkam.
Yes, vanakkam. Okay.
To yourself as a convener of the Madras Development Society,
Yes.
the Honorable Chief Minister of Pondicherry, and all of the distinguished guests. In South Africa, we say all protocols observed. And also to my fellow South Africans who I see have joined this conversation as well. Thank you very much for this opportunity and privilege of joining you on this particularly auspicious occasion. Mr. Mandela, or President Mandela, or Madiba as we call him in South Africa, is very much part of the DNA both of our society, our history, and the politics in our country. He embodies the spirit of non-racialism, non-sexism, the values of one humanity, and indeed the universal values contained in the Charter of Human Rights of the United Nations, but also our own human rights in Chapter 2 of our Constitution. And it is very appropriate that in moments of crisis, we call upon the thoughts and the kind of leadership that Nelson Mandela and others have offered both South Africa and the world to guide us through these conflictual times that we actually live in. Because the life and teachings of Nelson Mandela have lessons for all of us, wherever we might be in the world and whatever context we find ourselves in. And it's interesting that notwithstanding the impact of the virus COVID-19 on all of us and all our countries, that we are still able to communicate through this form of technology. I don't speak as a representative of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, nor the family, but purely as an activist of the African National Congress, the Natal Indian Congress, and the United Democratic Front, all of which have played a very important part in the liberation of this country, in as much as yourselves in India and the solidarity that you've expressed over many decades with the South Africa struggle for human rights have also played an inspirational role. We are all sharing a common legacy of colonialism, oppression, and exploitation in our respective societies, and in that sense have a shared history of resistance to oppression, to discrimination in any form, but also in relation to the various struggles that the Chief Minister pointed to earlier on. But the one set of values that Nelson Mandela and those of us that have grown up in the Sorry, I was muted.
No, it's okay.
So the one value which Nelson Mandela and all of us hold very dear is the value of non-racialism and non-sectarianism. It is an important value that can guide us today in many of the conflictual situations that the Chief Minister referred to, but also it has inspired generations of South Africans and freedom fighters elsewhere in the world to fight for the poor, the oppressed, those without employment, and those who have been marginalized in their respective societies. We ourselves in South Africa have been inspired by the struggles of workers from the early 20th century, the liberation struggles of people like yourselves in India, in China, and in many other parts of the world, including the African continent, and the kind of role that Kwame Nkrumah and others have played on this continent as well. And all of us have been informed, as I said, by a common set of principles which also pervaded the struggles that Martin Luther King and others were part of on the American continent today and many years ago. We are continuously committed to the principles of non-racialism, non-sexism, both in the world order, but also in our respective countries and continents, and must be uncompromising in pursuit of social justice and true freedoms the freedom from want of any kind for all of our people, not just for a select few. Having been influenced by many in the world, we in South Africa are active campaigners for peace. We are active campaigners on the African continent, where our president is the president of the African Union today and for this year, to actually silence the guns, as we call it here. And it's a phrase that you could borrow on the Asian subcontinent as well, because silencing the guns is an important part of protecting basic human rights for all citizens in our respective countries and continents as well. It is also the beginning of a process of eliminating poverty, eliminating inequality, and ensuring equal rights for women and other sections of our society. But ladies and gentlemen, today's world is very different from Nelson Mandela's world or Mahatma Gandhi's world or Martin Luther King's world. Today, geopolitics is very complex, and there are no longer a world that we have in which unipolar politics or bipolar politics is the call of the day. We live increasingly in a world that is developing towards multipolarity in one form or another, and the various border conflicts and other conflicts that we see must be placed within that context. But above all, who pays the price? As many have said throughout history, it is the young men and women of our societies who are sent out to war, who have to impose themselves on millions of people in our respective countries that are involved in conflict, and result in the kind of migration that we see and refugees that we see around the world, who today probably total some 200 million people. It is also a world in which geoeconomics is undergoing a transformation. Under the guise of a bipolar world, we have the conflict between the United States and China for economic supremacy, and of course many other emerging countries as well, who are trying to find a place for themselves within a new geoeconomic environment. We should also learn from the lessons of history that narrow nationalism is a dangerous phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that can easily whip up the emotions of people and lead to all kinds of xenophobia, which is abused by certain sections of society for their own benefits and does not, at the end of the day, match the kind of principles that Nelson Mandela and leaders of that caliber stood for, fought for, and lived for. In today's world, and in the real economies of the world, the economies in which real people work, small businesses thrive, and the real lives of people are impacted, you see a difference between that real economy and the financial markets. So it's the financial markets that we've all become used to watching when we want to know the health of an economy. What's the value of the currency? Is the stock market in a particular country rising or falling? And what are the factors that are actually influencing such phenomena? But the financial markets don't necessarily reflect the real economies and the real lives of people and their day-to-day struggles to earn a livelihood and thrive, particularly in the context of the pandemic that is affecting us. Today's world and today's countries are also impacted negatively by small groups of elites who want to accumulate wealth for themselves and ignore the majority. And that accumulation then leads to greed and corruption. And all our continents, all our countries are impacted by that kind of greed and corruption. And it is, again, the poor and the working people of our societies who pay the price of accumulation on the one hand amongst a handful of elites and the marginalization of millions of, tens of millions, in your case, hundreds of millions of people through the phenomenon of greed and corruption. The destruction of the environment and the impact on climate change as a result of this kind of greed is also something that the young people of our world is bringing to our notice and saying that apart from the traditional fights and battles that the Nelson Mandela generation struggled with, there are new struggles to be fought. There are new frontiers that are opening up for ourselves to commit ourselves to and ensure a better life for the billions of people on Earth. Authors and economists such as Piketty have, through their research, pointed out how in today's world and today's economy, the rich become richer and the poor either remain the same, or the middle class remains the same, or in fact declines. And the lives of working class people is resigned to precarious jobs and precarious lives. We've also got to be careful that in the quest of elites to remain in power and to maintain economic influence, that social fundamentalism of any kind must be discouraged. Racism of any kind must be discouraged. That the discrimination and misogyny as far as women are concerned must be discouraged and fought against. It is this spirit that Nelson Mandela would ask us to embrace today. It is this kind of cause of social justice and freedom, the new types of freedom that we need on earth, that Nelson Mandela's generation and Mahatma Gandhi's generation would ask leaders of today and the youth of today to embrace as their passion and their mission in order to save the world and to create a better environment for all of the people of the world and our respective countries as well. As Mr. Mandela pointed out, true reconciliation both within a country and between countries, excuse me, does not consist in merely forgetting the past, but rather to learn the lessons of the past and ask ourselves, how does that apply to the future? On the African continent, there are several illustrious examples of the quest for peace and conflict resolution. One such example is that between Ethiopia and Eritrea, which conflict was caught in a stalemate for many, many years. And in the last 18 months to 2 years, we've seen an important step taken in ensuring that there's peace between the two nations and the normal interactions between the peoples of the two nations as well. But of course, as this distinguished audience knows, and many know around the world, and scholars of conflict have advised us, that managing protracted social conflict and the kind of conflicts that have been brought to your attention is not a T20 match, a cricket match. It is not one that is over in 20 overs. And cricket being the passion of our friends in India and also in South Africa, you would be able to identify with that. Justice is in fact a very complex goal. It requires institutions that are designed to deliberately and determinedly operate in the public interest and for the attainment of the goal of peace and reconciliation amongst people. And perhaps one of the greatest dangers that each of our societies face is that of inequality. And inequality within a country and inequality between our countries. In the case of South Africa, the legacy of apartheid still leaves us with a huge level of inequality. We are still amongst the most unequal societies in the world and have done very little, not because of lack of effort, but because of the structural problems that apartheid has left us with, in order to ensure that as many people as possible in South Africa are included in the economy of South Africa, particularly our young people. So ladies and gentlemen, the problems of the world are well known, and the problems of our continents and countries are well known as well. So a long time ago, a gentleman called Lenin asked the question, what is to be done? Because I imagine that as a foundation and as individuals in different parts of the world, we are activists of sorts, and we are asking ourselves the question, what do we learn from Nelson Mandela, but also what do we do about what we learn? So the questions of today and the challenges of today must be informed by the spirit of yesterday, by the spirit of Nelson Mandela and his type of leadership, both in South Africa and indeed in the world. And perhaps one of the biggest dangers that the world faces today is that of a token democracy and the formalism of democracy. And here I wish to quote from a book which says how democracies die. And it says, the president is, and I quote, "The constitution is suspended or scrapped. On the electoral road, none of these things happen. There are no tanks in the streets. Constitutions and other nominally democratic institutions remain in place. People still vote. Elected autocrats maintain, excuse me, a veneer of democracy while eviscerating its substance. Many government efforts to subvert democracy are, inverted commas, legal, in the sense that they are approved by the legislature or accepted by the courts. They may even be portrayed as efforts to improve democracy. For example, making the judiciary more efficient, combating corruption, or cleaning up the electoral process." I end the quotation. And it is basically saying that in today's world, it is not men and women with guns and tanks that necessarily destroyed democracy. The democracy that Nelson Mandela gave his life for and spent 27 years in prison for. But democracy is today being eroded in all of our countries through the formalism of democracy on the one hand, but the weakening of its institutions on the other hand. It is being undermined by fake news and digital media like Facebook that have very evidently influenced, for example, the 2016 United States elections, and what it will do in the next elections in the United States is still to be discovered. Other forms of digital media can very easily communicate all kinds of sectarian and antisocial messages that can in fact destroy the fabric of a society. The promise of social cohesion, peace, and conflict resolution can in fact be destroyed very easily and become a tragedy instead. Elected leaders can easily dismantle institutions in the very presence of ourselves and institutions like your own, and promote racial and communal conflict in order to survive politically. There's a new populism that is built on anger and despair of the masses of our people. An anger and despair that comes from the fact that they are on the margins of society, on the margins of economic benefits, and see others become wealthy whilst they themselves don't see any improvement in their lives. And as has been proven over the last decade, this is the climate that gives rise to what is called the strongman phenomenon, where strong leaders, inverted commas, are asked to come in, take over democracies, and attempt to demonstrate that they know the answers to a country's problems. And we can see that in Brazil and in many other parts of the world today. So as I end, ladies and gentlemen, the spirit of yesterday certainly demands from the current generation of institutions like your own and activists throughout the world in our respective societies and on many different fronts on which they are engaged, to build on the same passion for social justice, equality for men and women, hope for our youth, and a better and safer world for all of the people of the world. And that essentially is the message of Nelson Mandela. And as you know, when he said the following at the end of his trial in 1964, which still remains very applicable today, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and see realized." It certainly had been realized. "But my Lord, if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." And that is an invitation and an inspiration for future generations of activists to take on the mantle of Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and many others, and produce a more equal, more just, and a more non-discriminatory world compared to the world that we live in today. Once again, thank you very much for this opportunity.